Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem from Arizona. I'm going to try to walk us through a couple simple concepts that require really complex math, so wish me luck here. Last week and the week before that, I came here and tried to walk through a concept of how fragile we are because of our borrowing, the amount of insatiable borrowing we go through, and my sarcastic comment that happens to have the benefit of being almost true, that the bond market is the one that pretty much now will run this country. And I actually can prove part of my thesis. The last week, because we here made it a couple weeks without looking like a clown show, we got some decent inflation data. The movement in the U.S. debt market on our interest rates coming down, if you annualize that, do you realize it's more than every dime of foreign aid? I need you to think about this for a moment, just those ticks. When a single basis point, remember 1% of interest is 1/100th of a point of interest. One tick is about $800 million a year. Whether this place likes it or not, when we tell the world we're not serious of leading the world, when we don't look serious that we're going to be the country that defends the reserve currency of the world, when we don't look like adults, we pay a price. And for many of the folks here, you get your 5 minutes of theater, and then we add hundreds of billions of dollars of additional interest. I'm going to show you charts here where we are approaching $1.2 trillion of interest this year. I'm going to try to walk through a concept that the spending, particularly what the Democrats did with the Inflation Reduction Act, where we're basically saying over the 10 years we're going to be pumping out a couple $1 trillion of subsidies to corporate America. Also the fact that because of our debt and these higher interest rates, we're also pumping out $1.2 trillion of interest payments out. So that much cash flow is going out into the marketplace. At the same time, the Federal Reserve is over here trying to pull liquidity out of the market to slow down inflation. For those of us that live in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, you have the right to be cranky. Because the day Joe Biden became president, from that day till today, if you're not making a little over 26% more in your paycheck, you're poorer today. So, for all of us who are elected here, our area happens to be probably the second highest inflation in the continental United States right now. And you meet people, and they've done fairly well in life. I have one of the more prosperous districts in America. I have one of the very best educated districts in America. And we're out there knocking on doors, and you get people you can just, they want to share with you. They're stressed out of their mind. And part of it, they don't completely understand why they seem to be working harder, why their kids can't afford a place, why price of education for their kids is just crushing them, why they seem to instinctively understand their kids are going to live poorer than they did, and which is now fact. That isn't rhetorical. Every data point, if you're functionally under 40, 45 years old, you will be poorer than my generation, my parents' generation. And it's the debt that's done this. It's inflation. Once again, let's do a basic economic class. Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. It's also a tax, because who's the biggest debtor in the world? It's the United States. Congratulations, we did it, yay! We're basically kicking off about $1 trillion every 100, 115 days of borrowing. And that interest helping kick off inflation. And inflation is that tax. The inflation we've had the last 3 years is the biggest tax in modern history. Because here's what happened. There's this massive amount of U.S. debt. We now are going to pay it back with inflated dollars. And your savings just became worth less. This country made a decision with the crazy spending that, screw them, set off inflation. We're going to reach in and grab the value of your savings, and we're going to transfer it to the debt and make the debt, we're going to pay it back with inflated dollars. Whether you know it or not, the reason you are poor today is you got taxed. Thank you for your contribution to U.S. debt. Did you know you were even doing it? The other thing is also the fragility concept. And this is something I've talked to dozens and dozens of members here, and I get that blank stare because we don't often think this way. We're on different types of committees. I do Ways and Means and financial services and those. So maybe my whole world is trying to think about the math. Today, the world has the highest level of debt since the Napoleonic Wars. You may not remember your history, but after that, the world went into a massive depression for years. The amount of debt, and do you know which two countries are borrowing at extraordinary rates? United States and China. When Greece has a better credit rating than the United States, you can sell a 10-year bond in Greece cheaper than the United States. And you go and read what the credit ratings, I think the United States now is number 14 in credit worthiness. Number 14, and we're the reserve currency. Anyone care? Because the hallways here are just full of people showing up at my door begging for more spending or begging us to set up rules to make sure that competition and new technology can't disrupt their business models. If you're under 40, I'm a baby boomer. I'm sorry. I wish we had thought about the math. I wish we had been more honest with ourselves. But there's ways to deal with this. There's ways to make it work. The other thing is we've been grinding through the Social Security Medicare actuary report. I'm still not done with it. And my economists and the Joint Economic Committee, we're still not done with this because we're also busy writing the response to the President Biden's economic report. But I'm going to walk through a few things here where we can't figure out why the actuaries would use the numbers they did because they're completely different than even OMB's and CBO's numbers. There's other things going on. So let's actually start to walk through, and some of these boards you will have seen before. A lot of them you will never have seen, and I'm trying to build a theme. The theme basically is this. This place needs to get serious and acting like adults and understanding. It's not our feelings anymore. It's not our theater for the troll that's going to bang on us. If you're also the Russian troll that's going to be in my comments when this goes on YouTube, screw you. Because the fact of the matter is, this country needs, the world needs us to act like adults, provide a level of stability, because when we don't, the price of our debt goes up. And when you're clicking off borrowing $1 trillion every 115 days, interest rates matter. Remember, if we're going to borrow a couple $1 trillion this year, and it's actually, look, right now our burn rate is like 2.8, 2.6 this year, and our refinancing is several trillion because you've seen treasuries decide to stay very short on the curve. That means instead of saying, we're going to sell a 10-year bond because the market turns out wasn't excited about buying a bunch of 10-year U.S. bonds because they didn't trust us. So we're doing, here's a 1-year bond or paper, 1-year note, 2-year note. Remember, there's notes, there's bonds, and it's the definition on the duration. We've made ourselves very fragile to the world to the bond market. And I used to come behind this microphone and joke that this country basically is an insurance company with an army. Now it's a really in-debt insurance company with an army. So let's walk through some of our realities. Yay! Okay, first thing I need to walk through, deficit over the last 12 months, 1.8. If you actually do gross, it's closer to 3 in the last 12 months. That was, originally we built this board, we thought it would be, that's what we're going to borrow publicly. Our burn rate is actually substantially higher than we expected. And what's enraging about this is the economy is fairly decent. We just weren't prepared for higher interest rates, higher other expenses, and the fact of the matter is much of the Democrats' Inflation Reduction Act, the most Orwellian named piece of legislation in modern history, its distortion effects in the economy, and also the borrowing, because when we're handing out cash grants, you think that money's coming out of tax receipts? It's borrowed. So the point I wanted to make here is when you see this blue, that's what I get to vote on as a member of Congress. The red, that's mandatory. So it's about 74, 75% of all spending is on autopilot. Your member of Congress doesn't get to vote on it. And guess what? Every dime I vote on is on borrowed money. Plus a sliver of your Medicare. Every dime a member of Congress votes on is on borrowed money. And then we play this game around here. When you're clicking off, we're just shy of borrowing about $100,000 a second. We have debates here where we're debating on saving this tiny little bit, and the borrowing during the debate was greater than the savings. Because we are terrified to tell you the truth that the majority of borrowing, every dime of borrowing from this day through the next 30 years, and I'm going to say this about a half a dozen times tonight, every dime of borrowing for today through the next 30 years, interest, Medicare, and then 9 years from now, when the Social Security Trust Fund's gone, do we backfill the shortfall? Everything else is in balance. All right, so let's continue to walk through this. So to give you a sense, that blue area I was just showing you before, and the chart that we get to vote on, okay, it's non-defense discretionary. That's everything you think of as government. You know, that's the FBI, that's the Park Service, that's the State Department. This over here is defense. So if you come to me and say, David, I want you to cut spending, which I'm all for burning a bunch of this down. A bunch of the things we do, I have a really weird ethical question that members of Congress need to think about. Is it ethical for the federal government to borrow money and send it to an entity that has its own taxing authority? When in many of those taxing authorities, if they actually had more skin in the game, might be a little more sensible and more disciplined how they spend it, because you realize that's one of the great scams here. We borrow it, we send it, we get love, and then the groups we send it to act like, hey, we got free money from the federal government, though you're paying it back. Well, actually, your kids are going to pay it back, and your grandkids, and your great-great-grandkids, because it's borrowed. Everything else you see, interest, Social Security, Medicare. Now remember, Social Security self-finances right now. Social Security is the payroll tax and the trust fund. And every month the trust fund gets a little smaller. And we do pay interest for the cash that the federal government, the Treasury, has borrowed out of the trust fund. We give them their principal back, and then the Treasury gives them a little bit of interest. But that's continuing to shrink. And then you look at everything else. You start to realize we don't run this government anymore. The mandatory programs in the bond market does. So the other thing, it also should just really annoy anyone who actually pays attention to the actual math instead of the theatrics. National debt increase in the first 7 months of this fiscal year we were, in 2023, at this point, we had borrowed about $500 billion. Yay, good job. Now we're at $1,450 billion, the same time period this year. Yet, you got to work through the problem with me. Was 2023 economically that different than this year? What happened? What happened? Well, our interest rates went up, so we're burning through tremendous amounts more cash. We actually had, in the last 12 months, I think we had 2 or 3 months where we had to borrow money to pay for our borrowing. And forgive me, I've had a stunning amount of coffee today, and I haven't slept well, and I'm just cranky. And look, this chart is actually worse now. It's just the only one I have. And some of these numbers I have trouble believing, and we go back and double check ourselves, and we go back and double check ourselves because the numbers read differently than the CBO report from 4 months ago or 5 months ago or the OMB report from 6 months ago. Because the economy is supposed to be fairly decent. How can we be bleeding like this? So think about this. CBO and those were saying, hey, we're going to be borrowing about 4.5%, 4.7% of the economy is going to be in borrowed money. But so far this fiscal year, our borrowing is closer to 9%. 9% of the entire economy. And why that's important. Why also looking at this chart, we're saying, here's our tax receipts. And we'll get the Democrats, and we need to talk about this, keep saying, well, if we would just tax rich people more. And have come here multiple times and shown the analysis of higher taxes on those with $400,000 up. So we take the left's and this president's proposal, and we say, let's tax maximize everything. Let's tax maximize their income taxes, their state taxes, their capital gains tax, everything. And then you look at the data, and you get about 1.5% of GDP. Okay, so we've used the Democrats' plan. We're going to tax our way to prosperity. You get about 1.5 of GDP. Great. For those of you, remember I showed you the chart of non-defense discretionary? You take 1% of that out of GDP, it's like 40% of all non-defense discretionary you just wiped out. So now you got yourself 2.5% of GDP that we either taxed or we cut. Great job, guys. You're seeing a chart here where we're starting to talk about over the coming decade, we're going to be at 31% of the economy is borrowed. But hey, guys, everything we talk about, we're going to get 1% of cuts and 1.5 of taxes. We're borrowing close to 9% of GDP right now. The CBO baseline was like 5. Anyone here do math? Anyone own a calculator? Anyone have a battery in the calculator? You can't cut yourself and you can't tax enough to make this work. Yet we are so vacuous intellectually around here. The ability to say, we are going to embrace the things that disrupt our cost drivers. We are going to actually adopt technology. We're going to adopt AI to change the cost of government. We're going to adopt the things that crush the price of healthcare, not by making it more scarce, not by rationing it, but by making it more moral. We can do that, except this place will run like hell every time you say, you know, we could actually have technology that would cure that disease. Oh no, that's our business model. In a couple of weeks, we're going to do a major presentation from the Republican side of the Joint Economic Committee. The math is not done yet. We are trying to grind through the #1 cost driver of this government. And this is I'm going to get some really, really interesting comments, and it's mathematically true. It's obesity. We're starting to chase down some data that says almost half of U.S. healthcare has a relationship to obesity. We're about to have our 5th year of prime-age males dying younger It's immoral. It's absolutely immoral what this place has become. The debt's immoral. What we do in healthcare is immoral. It's bad enough that we're destroying our kids. And look, I'm 62. My wife is 62. Maybe I shouldn't tell you that. I have an 8-year-old daughter we adopted. I have a 23-month-old little boy that's a miracle we adopted. And their brother and sister. Do they have the right to have the same life or even be more prosperous? Because the American sort of societal contract was the next generation will be more prosperous, and right now that's mathematically impossible. There's a way I can make it work, the way you can make it work, the way this place could make it work, and we're so busy knifing each other over petty crap because we're idiots. We're children here. Because doing hard things is hard. My father used to have a saying, if it's a complex problem, there's a simple solution. That's absolutely wrong. Complexity requires complexity. And the reason for this portion of this tirade is next year, about $380 billion a year in tax hikes. You, as an individual, your LLC, your subchapter S, your pass-through business, congratulations, your taxes are already going up next year. It's the law as it is already. I will argue it's one of the greatest opportunities we've had in modern times because we're going to be forced to actually act like adults and do something. Now, here's your battle. Will we be smart, creative, intellectually robust, saying, hey, let's use this as our opportunity to broaden the tax code, fix it in a way where we maximize prosperity and economic growth. And, oh, by the way, because we don't want to add to the debt, can we do things over here to actually change some of the debt drivers? We're going to legalize technology in healthcare. We're going to adopt technology to make government smaller but more efficient. We're going to crowdsource our data in a way where it's current, accurate, more moral. We have bills on all of this. This isn't just rhetoric. We've done bills on this stuff for years, and they've gotten much better. Will the vision, for particularly those with the responsibility of being on the Ways and Means Committee, will we actually step up and say, is it going to be binary? Hey, we're going to raise these people's taxes, lower these, so it balances out. Hey, screw everyone. Yay, we did something. Are we going to use the stressor that's coming with the expiration of those portions of the 2017 tax reform, use that to actually grow the society? But you got to ask yourself first, because many of my Democrat colleagues, I don't know if they agree with me that prosperity is moral. Having a society where every day you have the chance to live a little bit better, is that moral? Having a society where we're not poisoning ourselves with what we eat, is that moral? A healthcare system that's better, faster, cheaper, is that moral? Because all those things are in front of us. Because the chart after chart after chart basically says when we've had very high marginal tax rates, we get about 17, 18% of GDP. When we've had very low marginal tax rates, we get about 17, 18% of GDP. When we've done lots of extra corporate taxes, we get 17 to 18% of GDP. The fact of the matter is there's lots of brilliant economic papers and people have written their PhD theses on this. You know, you all have access to the internet, maybe go read. You're going to get about 17, 18% of GDP. And a bunch of the Democrat policies are, well, let's raise these taxes, we'll get 24% of GDP. Really? Tell me a time in U.S. history on a sustained basis that has happened. It just hasn't. You know, unless the Democrats' plan is to do a value-added tax, a VAT tax, which will crush the working middle class, you ain't getting that number. You got to stop making crap up. But yet we know our spending, because it's demographics. Remember our point before, interest, Medicare, backfilling Social Security. We got old as a society. And I'm going to show you a couple charts here that are really rough. And they're absolutely factual. Only reason I grabbed this one, and we're going to go through some of these pretty quick, is just to show you over the past 4 quarters, 600 billion, 288 billion, 487 billion, 258 billion. We're borrowing at quarters where a few years ago, that was the entire year. And here's one of the punchlines. Social Security, $1.452 trillion. So $1.45 billion. All right, that's Social Security this year. But Social Security is out of your payroll tax and then part of the trust fund. Interest now. There was a few of our brothers and sisters on that side who mocked me a few months ago, and I said, I think we're going to close in on 1.2 trillion in interest this year. Oh, Schweikert, you got to stop making crap up. OMB's own number now, Treasury's own number, $1.144 trillion is the interest this year. You want this number to go down? Make us look like a stable government. Make us look like we're adults. Convince the bond markets we're actually going to take on our debt in a meaningful way instead of playing theatrics. This is interesting right now. Now, there's actually a little bit of squish here, so you got to understand. So our most recent Treasury update, defense now is number 3, Medicare is number 4. We actually think that's going to flip again because last month it was flipped and reversed, but they're almost identical right now. But the punchline here is interest now is the second biggest expense in this government. And at our current borrowing rate, and if interest rates stay where they're at or go up just a little bit, in a couple of years, interest will be the number 1 spend in this government. Congratulations. And look, this is a hard chart to read. The point of this one is just interest fragility. What happens with small movements in interest rates on U.S. sovereign debt? The basic point is where we are interest rate-wise right now in 2033. So we're right now working on the 2025 fiscal year budget. So, 7, 8 budget years from now, our model at today's interest rates, we're at 3.7 trillion baseline borrowing. It's already, that's already our model. That's without a recession, that's without a war, that's without a pandemic, that's just where we're at. And I was going to bring here, but I have some other articles talking about how fragile we've made ourselves. God forbid this year, next year, we go into a true recession. You have any idea how fragile we've made this government, this country, with our ravenous borrowing? What would happen if tax receipts started to roll over a bit on us because we went into recession? Remember, tax receipts are up about 7%. Medicare spending's up around 10% this fiscal year. If that rolled over and wasn't 7%, was closer to 4, 5, you want to talk about a bloodbath. Okay. Raising interest rates could push the national debt towards 300% of GDP within 30 years. How many of you think the bond markets are going to let us get anywhere near 300% of GDP with our savings rates? If you're Japan, maybe you can do it. You have remarkably high savings rates. They can almost finance their own debt. Actually, they do finance their own debt. You think the rest of the world is going to keep loaning us money, respecting the sovereignty of the reserve currency, that is the dollar? Why are we destroying ourselves? Why are we destroying your retirement? Why are we destroying your kids, my young kids? But yet the hallways, once again, are full of people wanting more money. So now let's actually talk through a couple things that are even more uncomfortable than talking about the debt. You all saw a week ago Friday the update on U.S. fertility rates. Yes, going to have an idiot congressman talk about how many children we're having in society because it's important. We sit there in our office, and I'm blessed to have some freaky smart staff, people much smarter than I ever could dream to be, a bunch of economists, and we're trying to figure out, saying, okay, over the next decade, 2 decades, how do we pay Social Security? How do we pay Medicare? How do we do these things? And the Democrats, oh, we'll just raise more taxes. But then you show them the studies that math doesn't work. Well, we're just going to lie to our voters and survive the next election. Great job, guys. Well, we have a little problem. A week ago Friday, you saw the updated report on the 2023 fertility rates. I was wrong on my number. It's worse. It is worse than the speeches I came here and gave. We're down to 1.62, meaning we are way below replacement rates now. The United States is dying. And one of the things I'm frustrated with is the Census Bureau numbers basically say when we start to get beyond, because remember, the Census Bureau had us at 1.64. Turns out they were wrong. It's 1.62. And they were projecting as we go through the rest of this century, which is a long time. But think about it, your kids. You have a young child right now. They're going to live, hopefully, with the Lord's blessing, 100 years. We start to collapse population-wise. And we're going to walk you through a couple of why these are such a big deal. Deaths are projected to exceed births. This chart said 2040. It's a little sooner. If you take last week's fertility number, in about 15 years, the United States will have more deaths than births. There is no industrialized country that has succeeded in adopting policy that changed their fertility rates on the long run. So you have Hungary and these others, hey, well, like your future life, have a 4th kid, no income taxes in the future. Hey, we'll buy you a house. We'll do, and you get a little pop, and then boom, after a few years, it moves right back to mean. Got to deal with the reality. It turns out all over the world, as the world's gotten more prosperous, we have a collapse in fertility. But yet we built a social entitlement system. You know, it's earned benefits. You earned your Medicare, you earned your Social Security, but they were based on the concept that there would be this many workers. Because the reality, today's FICA taxpayer, payroll taxpayer, their paycheck went into your Social Security check today, or your Medicare. It's just the way it's always been. What happens when that next generation gets smaller? Are we also emotionally, mentally prepared for the number of schools that will be closing? Because it's starting to happen all over the country. Because U.S. fertility started to roll over in 1990. It's just now accelerated. We had a tiny little blip, during the pandemic, and now it's gone back, and the trend line continues to get uglier and uglier. But it's reality. Think about it. You live in a country where in 15 years, we'll have more deaths than births. Are we prepared for that? And are you ready? Are we ready? Is this body intellectually ready for saying, okay, you can adopt policies that are child-friendly, this and that, but there's no other country that's come up with an example where it actually raised the number of children. Are we ready to adopt policy to embrace technology? And this is where it gets really uncomfortable. How many robots are you ready to embrace? How much AI are you ready to embrace? When you call the IRS, instead of having a person, are you ready to be talking to ChatGPT? Probably in that case, you might prefer the chat. We are going to have to adopt the embracement, or whatever the word would be, of technology in ways to keep the economy growing without more people. And this is happening all over the industrialized world. How many times behind these microphones have you heard any member of Congress come and say, hey, I actually care about prosperity, I care about the next generation, I care about economic growth, I care about the future. We're going to adopt things where we're going to embrace technology so we can keep having prosperity. Huh? The math is the math, and the math will always win. And one of the things I'm also annoyed with is, as reading through the Social Security actuarial report, they're making crap up. They have fertility numbers in here. They have us growing. CBO actually has numbers growing. And yet we talk to the Census Bureau, and the Census Bureau is down here. Could our government agencies actually, who we spend a fortune with all these actuaries, maybe have a cocktail party? Preferably no alcohol. Make it a coffee. We'll do a coffee. Because that's what he needs, is a bunch of well-caffeinated actuaries in the same room, from Social Security, from maybe OMB, CBO, a couple of these others, the Census Bureau, in the same room. Can you give us a number? Because you're making it miserable around here trying to actually say, here's what our future looks like. Because so far, they keep being wrong. It's a little geeky, but that's important, and that was my mocking them for the number of times I send them memos saying, can you explain your number and why it's so different than each other? Look, the other point, and I got some questions on this from last week, so I just brought the board back. You had the president stand right there, and he basically said, we're going to do this for Medicare. We're going to raise this tax and this and that. Okay. The red portion here is when you pay your payroll tax. That's the portion that goes to the Medicare trust fund. The rest you functionally pay for. This comes out of the general fund, which we're borrowing part of it. Over here, that's actually your premiums, and a little bit of this is some other transfers. And then we also have a little slice here, which is for dual eligibles, those who are seniors but may be in Medicare, Medicaid. So we also get a little sliver from the state. But once again, the majority of spending in Medicare is not the trust fund. Now, I'm elated that the current model on the trust fund is it extended for another few years. That's wonderful. We need to sort of study that, except if you read the actuary report, the reason it extended is really fragile. This dark blue there, that and interest are the primary drivers of U.S. debt. Tell the truth. Maybe get you unelected. But how do you make public policy in a world where you're not allowed to tell the truth? Oh, that's what members of Congress do. Rising Social Security and Medicare shortfalls drive nearly the entire 2019 to 2023 deficit rise. It's the facts. That's CBO's own quote. And here's the board that I promise will be in the attack ad going at me the next election, except it's CBO's own numbers, except it's 2 years out of date. There's a number right here. It basically says Social Security and Medicare, $116 trillion deficit. The rest of the budget, $3 trillion, is functionally in balance. Except the problem is, for anyone right now you care enough, go grab your phone, go use a search engine, look up CBO's report from 6 weeks ago. 30-year number is not $116 trillion. It's $143 trillion is now our model. That's what higher interest rates did. $143 trillion. 100% of that borrowing. Medicare and the interest financing on that. Backfilling of Social Security and the interest financing on that. We can revolutionize this if we finally be willing to legalize technology. The morality of moving and pushing cures. Why does this place seem to like to finance people's misery instead of working with the FDA, working with biopharma, working with the people out there that are disrupting disease and misery. We seem to have a place around here that wants to build diabetic clinics instead of cure diabetes. What's wrong with the morality of this place? Another thing we're trying to figure out in the Social Security Actuary Report is they play this game where, hey, when we get the out years, things collapse. We'll do that in a week or two because it's a little complex. Another chart just trying to explain once again what is the Part A, trust fund, Part B, general fund. This here, Part D, also is a combination of also some of the fees you pay. That's your Medicare. And back to the last couple points I want to make here. When I just told you we're about to have our 5th year prime age males dying younger, is it moral to stand here and say, remember, this chart functionally ends at 2020. It's actually gotten uglier. The U.S. is an outlier in disease and disability trends. We're sicker than the rest of the industrialized world. Is it we're not spending enough on health care? Well, that's absurd. Because, let's be honest, we engage in agricultural policy, nutrition support policy where you can take your EBT card and go buy onion rings. Is that moral? Why isn't there a fixation in this place when we have states where over half the population statistically is obese? They're dying on us. We have a society that finances crap in our diets. Why would we do this to each other? Is that Republican or Democrat? I'm just trying to make the arguments in moral. And it turns out if you took it on, it's the single biggest thing you could do for U.S. debt, is take on the very things that are killing us. And I've done presentations before. They were a little geeky, trying to explain that if we could make our society healthier, it's the single biggest thing I can do to reduce U.S. debt. And then there's these things, you all remember your high school economics class. First degree effects, second degree effects, third degree effects, knockoff effects. You remember all the weird language? You want more of our brothers and sisters to be able to marry and family formation and participate in society and be able to participate in the economy. Help us make our society healthier. I'm trying to make, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I'm trying to make the morality argument that the very thing that would be most effective for us to take on the U.S. debt, legalizing technology to crash the price of healthcare, putting technology into this government to make government smaller and more efficient. It requires thinking. It also requires really annoying a whole bunch of the people in our hallways demanding more money from us. It's also would be incredibly moral and would actually give our kids a chance for, in many ways, the prosperity that we and previous generations had. Think about it. We've done this to ourselves. There is a way out. It's not easy. It requires some complexity. And are these Republican or Democrat ideas? They're neither. They're just hard. They're just hard. And with that, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentlewoman from Vermont, Ms. Ballant, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.